Hello there, and welcome back, or welcome to the channel. If you've been following along in the P74 valve series, Chris's goal with the build is to have 800 to 1,000 horsepower. So when it came to the injection pump, he said, Eric, max it out. Give me everything you can do. So in this video, I'm going to be covering all the pump mods you can do yourself, outside of sending it to a shop to get benched and phased. And I'm going to go over the different types of injection pumps, how some can support more power than other ones, how to make sure they're good, and then different types of fuel plates, different types of delivery valves, different types of governor springs. I'm going to explain about how they all affect drivability, what you might want, power gains expected with each one, and a whole bunch of other things. If you like this type of content, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I have a bunch more P-Pump videos to follow, as well as some drivability and tuning on Chris's truck to come later. With that out of the way, let's dig in and let's get this thing making some real power. So we're going to start off with the injection pump itself. Depending on what pump you have a different amount of power you can support with it. So assuming you're starting with a 94 to 95 pickup truck, you either have a 160 or 175 horsepower engine. And both those pumps are pretty well identical. There's a couple little small differences, but the total output they can put out is about 700 horsepower. Maybe a little bit higher to 800 if you use nitrous or different combos, but that's about the expected area for them. Then in 96 to 98, you have a 180 horsepower injection pump for automatic trucks and a 215 horsepower injection pump for the manual trans trucks. And both those pumps have the same pump cam. The pump cam is different in the earlier pumps, and they have different plunger assemblies inside them. So the problem with the 94 to 95 pumps is with the design of the camshaft, they can't really support much power above 3,000 RPM. They just can't fill the plungers fast enough or deliver fuel fast enough. So if you expect on going higher than 700 horsepower, you're going to want to start with a 180 or a 215 horsepower pump. So getting on to modifying it, the very first thing you're probably going to do is move this sucker forwards. This right here is the AFC Housing. It's the Anaeroid Fuel Controller. It sees air through an orifice in here, which then fills this cavity, and it has a diaphragm, and it moves a rod inside that then allows the pump to output more fuel. I'm going to take this apart later to modify it so it can output even more fuel, and I'm going to kind of show you how it works and how I calibrate it. But there's usually two tamper-proof screws or one tamper-proof screw. There's two over here, and I have those removed right now. Now, the very first thing you can do is, if you don't want to mess with things too much, you can just loosen these bolts off, and this has an ovaled hole in it, like so, and you just push it full forwards. And what that does is it allows you to have more fueling right away, which I'll kind of get into more complexities of it, but it allows you more pre-boost fueling, like before you get into boost, it allows more fuel, and then it allows more top-end fueling as well, limited by the fuel plate. And we'll remove it here, take a good look at it, we'll cover it later. Underneath that is the next thing you'll likely modify, and that's the fuel plate. It's held in by two Phillips screws, and this is a virgin pump. It's never been touched before. Remove the screws. Be really careful you don't drop them in the pump. And much like the AFC housing, the fuel plate is slotted as well. So what you can do is put it what is commonly referred to as full forwards. So the pump or the plate is pushed full forwards, and that allows more top-end fueling. So in addition to the AFC full forwards, which gets you more low-end fueling, the fuel plate full forward allows you to get more top-end fueling. Now the fuel plate is, somebody actually cut this one. I lied. This is not a virgin pump. I haven't seen this cut before. The fuel plate restricts fuel as well. So you can just take the fuel plate out, and then now you have all the fuel. And your fueling is then controlled entirely by the AFC housing. So what I've got in front of me is an assortment of different fuel plate grids. And the best way I can describe these is a physical representation of a boost and RPM curve, where boost is horizontal and RPM is vertical. And tuning them and explaining how it all works is topic for another video, because I've tried to describe it in a short way and it's not easy. So the best thing I kind of say to keep this video short and with the idea of maximizing your pump is you can do a zero cut or no fuel plate, and there's things that does that work and things that it does that doesn't work. The plate I like to run is a number 10 plate if you just want to buy a plate and put it in the truck, as this one will limit low end fueling, and as RPM increases it gives you more fueling. And then I don't really like that it limits on the top end here, as say at about 2000 RPM it's going to start pulling some fuel back. So I like to run this plate that was built by Richard Mead of RPS Diesel. And Richard's a really smart guy. I enjoy talking with him, and he knows way more about these things than I do. The best I can kind of describe this plate is you'll limit your low end fueling, RPM will increase and boost will increase, and it just has a nice application of fuel. I'm not going to get into too many details about tuning these and the correlation between governor springs and the fueling area. I'm going to have a separate tuning video here, as it gets pretty in depth. But I guess if you just either you pick no fuel plate, you a 10, or you do a grind like this. So I'm going to do a grind like this for Chris's pump. I'm going to see how it works, and I'm going to show you how nice we can get this to run. While you have the fuel plate out, it's good to check the health of your pump. So let's say you have this pump, you got it off a guy secondhand, and it's just sitting here. The main thing to tell if the pump is functional is if this can move nicely. And if this is stuck, you have what's called a stuck rack. And typically one of these plungers will be stuck in the piston bore or plunger bore. And you can sometimes fix it if you pull the delivery valves off and then turn it over and then tap the top of the plunger with a hammer and a punch just lightly, and then brake clean it out. I've had some luck fixing them, as they kind of stick with sitting. But if it's to the point where it's locked right up, it's dangerous, and I'd send the pump out to a builder to get rebuilt, as you don't want it to hang up on you and run away. So that's the main thing to watch for. It's just nice, good rack travel where it moves nice forward and back. So with our fuel plate picked out and installed, we're going to move on to the AFC housing and maximizing this sucker. So on the back of it, you've got this 2 screws here and this little cover. Move that to the side. And underneath here is the adjustment for your pre-boost fueling. So what this does is when you screw in the Allen head in the center, it moves this armature forwards and allows you more fuel before you're in boost. And I'm not going to go into it too much as far as setting the AFC up, as that's going to be covered in a tuning video. So we're just going to do the modifications today. So we're going to leave that untouched. I'm not going to touch anything with the tuning. We're just going to maximize this AFC housing. So when you apply air to this AFC housing, this foot moves forwards. And what the common mod to do is you cut this armature just a little bit right here so it can travel even further. And then inside there's a cup washer. There we are. So we're going to remove that carefully. Not to rip the diaphragm. Set that aside. So we see air goes, fills the diaphragm, and then it pushes it forward here. And underneath this, there we are. There's a cupped washer here. And either you replace this with a fender washer from a hardware store, or you shave down the lip. So I'm gonna go see if I have that washer. Oh, so I had one left. So this is just a 1.5-inch washer, and the center is approximately 5/16, 3/8 around there. You can take your other one into a hardware store and find an equivalent washer. So why we do this is because that cup washer with the lip, as this travels, that cup, here I'll explain it better with that cup will hit the raised surface around it there, which prevents further travel of the AFC armature. So even if we put the fender washer in there, you still can't get that last little bit of travel. So that's where it comes in that you'll cut this foot. So up front you have a bolt that uses a 10mm wrench. You'll remove that, and this can move left and right, and it adjusts the height of this foot. And at the time right now, I can't quite remember how that changes things, so I just typically set them to how they were. So you take a screwdriver, and then there's a little notch there. You can just pry like that, and that pries out. And you remove that, and then I'm going to go and mark this with the caliper for about 3 millimeters, and then cut it, and then reinstall it. So you're going to want to reinstall your now shorter AFC foot, and you can see with the washer in the back, now it can actually bottom out, so you get that extra couple inches or millimeters of travel. So this in the pump will allow you to have all the fueling capability that it can by having this modified. So we're going to put this all back together. You can get different springs, and they change the rate at which Boost will add fuel and move this foot, but I'm not going to get into that until the tuning video here. So for now, we're just going to leave the stock spring in here, and I'll show you how to set it up later. Come around to the front of the pump. What you want to do when you do the AFC Max Travel mod is do a rack plug as well. Now, there's some things to be said about the rack plug. It allows you more fuel by allowing the injection pump to inject more fuel for a longer duration. Now, the trouble with this is that with long duration fuel injection, okay, so it takes 28 degrees of crank angle as the engine is turning to inject at full rack travel. Now, assuming you have 20 degrees of timing, 8 degrees of that is going to be injecting after top dead center, which is just wasted fuel, wasted power, more smoke, and high EGTs. Ideally, what you'll do is you'll have a pump that outputs more fuel than you need, and you don't run it to full rack travel. You run it to mid rack travel. So on my personal trucks, I had a 215 pump on one truck, and that thing maxed out, made pretty good power. Then I put on a 30 millimeter P pump that flowed possibly double what that pump did. And when I set it up, I set it to pretty modest on the AFC Housing, so it only went up to half the total fueling capability, half rack travel. And that truck drove better, got lower EGTs, had more low end power, and that's to kind of put it in a really short sense. I guess TLDR, rack plug, make more fuel, but also make more heat. Yeah. Coming around to the back of the pump, if you remove a plug right here with a 7/8 socket, you'll see the governor spring assembly. Now, you may not see this, so you're going to have to turn the pump over, and in the event that you have a pump off the truck, make sure that the timing pin is not pinned. So we've got some 3K, 4K gov springs right here. These are from Amazon. They're like $36. They work great. I've used lots of them. Got one spring from a 5K gov spring set. The other spring is in the pump. I pulled it out. And then we've got a diesel auto power 5,000 RPM governor spring kit. So I'm going to remove the stock governor springs out of this and show you how they're different. And I know how to set these up based on feel. Some people say go 3 clicks. However, I've had people mess that up and blow a P pump up once before. So what I like to do for beginners to make it easy and repeatable is to take a caliper here with a dead battery. Come on. Take your caliper, and on the pump, there's a stud in the center of it, and there's the nut. And I'll measure the depth of the nut from that stud as best I can. So this one's 10 thou deep on the very dim screen there. And sometimes they'll go as high as 100 thou deep. This one's actually quite high. You'll take a couple measurements and see it the best you can. Something to note about the tension on this is if you have a truck that you have to give it a little bit of throttle to start, these governor springs get a little tired over time. And you can raise idle externally via this adjustment screw right here. So with regards to having to give it throttle to start, these just with them getting soggy, just give it just a little click, and that's it. Your idle may go up a little bit, but if it's kind of soggy to begin with, then it probably would have helped it out. Or if you do that and your idle's higher afterwards, then you loosen this off. So this one is a little loose from feeling it. I'll kind of push it Oops. I'll push it and see if get a good idea of the spring tension of it. So now I'll remove the nut. So I just kind of go till it's loose, and then I have this little screwdriver with a magnet on the end, and I spin it out with that. That way there's very minimal chance that you can drop that in the pump. Next, I'll use the screwdriver to remove all the springs. It's usually this first one kind of takes a little bit of fighting to get it out. Then do the same for the springs. Remove that. Be careful, as there'll be little shims here as well. That's why I like to use the magnet. You can pull the large outside spring does not have to come out, but I'll remove it anyways. Just kind of keep going until there's nothing else. Except for this. You're going to want to leave this in here. This is a shim for the idle spring, which is the largest most spring. I'm going to push that back in there and leave them be. So, looking at what we pulled out here, a couple springs from the stock assembly. The largest most spring, as I said earlier, is for idle. So you can actually just run the pump on just this spring, and you got maybe like 1,000 RPM before it defuels. Then all the little springs inside dictate the max RPM governing. And it's kind of you got the medium spring, the small spring, this piece, and this other piece. And basically just throw these in the garbage. Don't need them. Now, a good budget alternative is these Amazon, I think sometimes they're Handy Tech 3K, 4K governor spring sets. And you throw all that stuff out. You have just one big solid base, and then all these couple springs. And if you wanted to limit RPM at 3,000, you just don't use the small center spring. But if you want to go to 4,000, you use that spring as well. So here's the whole assembly, and we're not using that today. Then we've got this 5K gov spring. I'm not too sure who sells this. You just throw all those springs out, and you just use that and this one. And some people say they're really touchy and how they act, and I don't mind them, but I'm pretty good about setting up everything. Then these are the Diesel Auto Power 5K gov springs, and they have a different idle spring, which I'm curious, I haven't tried before. It appears to be a little bit heavier of a spring rate than the stock idle spring, so we'll see how it performs. So just like as we pull it out, put the idle spring in, put the large spring in there. Actually thinking now, because it uses a different idle spring, I'm going to remove that shim for the other idle spring, as it's intended for that one. So we'll just put in the new idle spring, then the new inner spring, put on this holder, and then I'll use this to screw on the nut. A lot of your gov springs you guys are going to install, if they're not the Diesel Auto Power 5Ks, you're going to be following the caliper method of testing spring tension. However, because this uses a different idle spring, the nut depth is going to be different. So this is kind of where it's important to know what an appropriate level of tension is on this spring. So people say 3 firm clicks, and it's kind of tough to say. Like right now, this is really tight. I'm going to loosen it off a little bit, kind of loose, play with it to find a good balance between tightness and firmness. Before I spun it over, I measured the nut depth of this side. I'm going to try and match the other side best I can. So this one was 60 thou. So I'm going to go and install the other side and try to have it match this side, and it should work good. I can't say what the symptoms of an unbalanced set of governor springs are. It might be touchy or it might be shaky. I'll see if I can find something. On the top of the pump here, we've got the delivery valve holders, and underneath them is the delivery valves. So you unscrew this, you need a special socket, so something like this. This Blue Point one is garbage. On the 160 and 175 pumps, it slides right on, it's awesome. On the 180 and 215 pumps, I have to hit it on with a hammer and then hit it off with a hammer. It's a pain in the ass. And rant aside, unscrew this, and then gently, if you have this on the truck, I try to kind of twist off sideways and keep the spring inside. We'll set this aside and we'll take a look at what's inside here. You've got your delivery valve, and what happens is the plunger inside the pump comes up, outputs fuel, and then this rises up and lets fuel go past and then to the injector. And this, it's meant to have a clean start and end of injection. Here's what it looks like. So fuel comes up past it, and then this is the sealing kind of part of it right there. And what you'll do with a full cut is what I'm going to do today, is you machine this whole lip off, and then on a 7 mil they mill down the diameter, and then say a 191 or an 024 or an 022 is they'll machine down the thickness of it so fuel will get injected quicker and you'll get more because it doesn't have to travel up as much. This is a 181 delivery valve, and the earlier 94, 95 pumps will have a delivery valve like this, which is a 131. And the holder's a little different. You see the 131s have a little of a thinner ridge. So you could put a 131 in a 180 and a 215 pump and gain a little bit more power as a good budget kind of alternative. So if you're doing this to your pump and you just kind of want to be a cheap bastard, go on Amazon or eBay or whatever, and you can get a 191 delivery valve for like $35. That's Canadian, so even cheaper in US. And put them in. They make good power, and that's kind of my go-to for pretty much any pump, just because they're cheap and available. Now, if you want to go for max power, either you 7mm, which either you have to machine down yourself, or you buy them, or you do full cuts, which I'm going to make in my lathe today out of these stock delivery valves. Looking down at the plunger here, as I move the rack on the pump, this plunger rotates, and it has a helix on it, and depending on how much it rotates is dependent on allows it to have more fuel injected. So when you do the max travel mod, you can have this travel even further. You can see the little notch on it, which is signifying a 215 pump, as all the other pumps do not have that notch. And if you had a 160 or 175 pump, you'll have a copper washer just deep down inside there. So I guess that's a way to tell, is notch top 215, flat top, but no copper washer is a 180, and then copper washer is a 160, 175. What I'm going to show you now is what my cousin Darcy with the coal staying named full cut delivery valves. And I use my lathe here to machine off the edge of the stock delivery valve, giving it a full cut. You don't want to touch the upper kind of sealing surface there, just machine off that lip. And what happens with this is, as soon as your plunger is injecting fuel, this is open and letting fuel get into the engine. And having a set of these versus, you know, say we have two trucks, one running these, one running these. If you put full cuts on a truck and you run less injection duration, so you're not running your pump all maxed out, you can actually have it make the same power as it would have with these delivery valves with lower EGTs and less smoke. So where the combos where full cuts get a bad name is everyone maxes everything out, max rack travel, max smoke, max fuel, all that, and it gets really hot, and yeah, just the wrong combo. Anyways, to machining here. I got it jawed up in the chuck. I'm gonna check your test clearance. Come in on the lathe. Kind of finicky, but you get the idea. Now with your aftermarket delivery valves, whatever you choose, I'm just going to drop them in there. So I got the full cuts. And another thing is the aftermarket delivery valve holders. The stock ones, if you look in the center of it, you can just make out the hole, which is pretty restrictive. And You can get those EDM'd, or you can get these cool stainless aftermarket delivery valve holders. These ones are a cheaper mild steel one, but they look just as good. I've got the stainless ones on this pump here, and they're a little nicer machining, but otherwise just as cool. And yeah, it's a lot more flow. I've heard these are worth another 35 cc's of fuel, which the general statement is 2 horsepower per cc. So that'll be about like a 65 horsepower gain worth of fuel from just these suckers. Another thing I've seen done on my Scheid Lightning pump, which I've got down there, is they replaced this banjo thing with just a couple of washers. However, I've thought about instead, because this is kind of a banjo, the fuel has to come up the sides, is cutting the center off it, because it is just centered like that, or drilling it out, and then that might kind of improve a little bit more power as well. But anyways, the valve in there, then the new holder screws on like that. I've got to put an O-ring on it though, but I'm going to get all these done and move on. Got all the delivery valve holders torqued down now, and some nice stainless nuts to contrast with it. This pump's looking really good. Can't wait to get it on the truck. The last performance mod you can do is a cheap and easy one. Is you loosen all these nuts off, take a hammer and punch, and you hit right here, and you rotate each barrel assembly clockwise until it bottoms out on the other one. So like right here, that will touch there. This is called a Hillbilly Bench. I've done it to a couple pumps. My cousin Darcy's running it on his coal staying there. I first learned from it from a post on Competition Diesel by Will from Power Driven Diesel, and a couple of people have done it. It works good. I'm not going to do it because we're going to kind of see how this all performs, and I'll leave it on the table if Chris just can't get that 1,000 horsepower mark here, just because it kind of throws the pump off balance. But some people have reported that it's like run smooth. It's ran smooth for me, so we're just going to kind of leave it for now. There's a lot of changes already made. But that's worth another 35 cc's or so, about 60 horsepower, 60, 70 horsepower. That's when you need every ounce of power out of it. So that's it for performance adding mods. The next thing I'm going to do is the relocated oil feed. As on a P-Pump 24 valve, the intake plenum is a little bit wider, and it's so close to the head that you can't get this oil feed tightened on. Except when you have the head off, it's not so bad. So you just remove the fitting up here, and then I've got a Crazy Carl's kit to put it up in the front here. Okay, so both fittings are off, and I found out the first time on the first P-Pump 24 valve build I did that while this fitting isn't restricted, the orifice it goes into on the pump is. And when I had put just this fitting inside here, it flooded the pump with oil. It was way too much, and it leaked out of it. It made a big mess. So the Crazy Carl's fitting is a smaller hole. Now, the way I got around this being cheap is I just welded that up, and I took a drill bit and just drilled it out to the smaller size. So it's as simple as just screwing that on there. I had to find the copper washer. There's a copper washer for it, and then just put in the old plug back on the other side. There you have it, all pimped out and ready for the P-Pump 24 valve here. This truck is gonna look really good. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you are. The next video is up is the second part of the assembly of the P-Pump 24 valve, where I install the pump, set timing, install the head, put the lines on. I believe we're gonna go all the way to getting it running. So the next video is the big important one. So make sure you're subscribed and ready for that one. And you can see this sucker fire up and see how it runs. I'm pretty excited. I know Chris is even more excited. He's always asking me what's going on and is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Well, we're one step closer with this. Anyways, thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. See you later.